Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I am going to explain asymmetric key cryptography. So, in previous video, I explained asymmetric key cryptography. In this video, I am going to explain asymmetric key cryptography. So, asymmetric means not the same keys. Okay, na? So, two sides, two different keys should be used by this sender and receiver. Those two must be related each other, right? So, asymmetric means not same, and we also call it as and another name for asymmetric key cryptography is public key cryptography. Public key cryptography. Public key cryptography. And one more another name is there, that is two key cryptography, because here we are using two keys. Two key cryptography. Okay, na? So either asymmetric key cryptography or public key cryptography or two key cryptography, because sender, you say the person is sender and the receiver, right? Two parties are there for communication. So sender and receiver. If sender uses one key, receiver must use another key, right? Another key. But here, these two keys must be related each other. If sender uses one particular key, receiver must use another key, but these two keys must be mathematically related each other. Like that, the keys are used under public key cryptography, right? So two keys are there. If one key is used by sender and another related key must be used by the receiver. Then I'll explain what are the essential steps for this particular cryptography. Essential steps. There are, you know, some important steps are there. Every participant has to follow those steps in this particular environment, right? In this particular environment, publicly cryptographic environment, right? Okay, I'll tell you those essential steps. I'll explain those essential steps, right? Steps for important steps or essential steps required for asymmetric key cryptography. Four important steps are there. First step is every participant in this organization or environment, every user or every participant, we call them as participant, right? Every participant, every participant responsibility is to generate two keys. Every participant should generate two keys. Okay, na? And two keys are pair of keys. We call them as pair of keys. One key is called as public key. One key is called as public key, and another key is called as private key or secret key, right? Private key or secret key. So the second essential step is, after generating pair of keys by every user, one key, every user must publish one key or inform one key to all the persons, right? One key, inform one key to all the participants, right? All the participants. So this key is called public key. Okay, na? This key is called public key. And another key must be kept secret. Another key must be kept secret. Okay, na? So this second key is called secret key, right? So secret key is known to the respective person, and public key must be publicized to or sent to all the remaining persons, right? So every user responsibility is maintaining all the remaining users public keys. Okay. So in first step, every user generates two keys, and one key is called as public key, another key is called as private key. But here these two are mathematically related each other, right? Mathematically related each other. If you use one key for encryption and another key must be used for decryption. If this key is used for encryption, this key must be used for decryption, right? So like that, those keys are generated. That's why we call them as mathematically related keys. There is a mathematical relationship is there between those two keys, and every user responsibility is they must inform the public key to all the participants in the organization or environment, and they must keep private key as a secret at their particular locations, right? Suppose in third case, if any user wants to communicate with any other user, The first user is called as sender, right? First user is called as sender and second user is called as receiver, right? So sender, he has two possibilities for using keys. One is he can use his own public, his own secret key, his own secret key, or his own secret key he can use, or public key of receiver. Because private key of receiver is unknown to the sender, right? So receiver's public key he can use because receiver public key is known to him and all the remaining participants. Every user public key is known to every other user in the organization, but secret key is known to that particular user only. So here sender cannot use the secret key of receiver and sender cannot use his public key also. He cannot use his public key because if sender uses his public key, the receiver must use sender's private key because whenever any person uses one particular key in a pair, the second user must use another key in that particular pair, right? So sender, he cannot use, he cannot, sender cannot use, sender cannot use his private key, right? Sender cannot use his private key, public key because another side, the receiver must use his private key. That private key is unknown. So, not possible keys are public key of sender. This is not possible. Public public key of sender is not possible at the sender side. And anyway, receiver's private key is not available. Private key private key of receiver is not possible, right? Because private key of receiver is known to receiver only. So these two are non-possible keys at the sender side. Of course, sender can use his own public key because public key is available. But at the receiver side, receiver must use sender's private key. That sender private key is unavailable at receiver, and he cannot also use private key of receiver because that receiver's private key is known to receiver only. So only two possible keys are there. One is secret key of his own, and another one is public key of receiver. So based on that, suppose if sender uses secret key of his own, then receiver uses public key of sender. Anyway, public key of sender is known to receiver as well as all other participants. And he can also use public key of receiver. If sender uses public key of receivers, then receiver can use his own private key because private key is known to that particular participant only. So these are the requirements of public key cryptography. Then I'll draw all these possibilities related diagrams and I'll explain now. Once after seeing essential steps, I will introduce you what are the different possibilities for encrypting the data at sender side and what are the possibilities that receiver can use and which particular service is provided based on the key. Because we know authentication and confidentiality are very, very important. So based on key usage, we say that either authentication is provided or confidentiality may be provided or both may be provided based on that particular scenario, right? I'll draw all these three possibilities. All these three possibilities now. Okay. Suppose that is sender is there here. Sender wants to convey. This is message originator. Message originator is always sender, right? Message originator. Okay, now suppose message originator means sender wants to send message X. Suppose this X may contain some bits X of X1, X2, X3, so on, etc. Right? This X is sender wants to convey this X as a message to receiver. Now this is the algorithm which is used by the sender for encrypting the data, right? This is the encryption algorithm. Okay, na? Encryption algorithm. In first scenario, sender can use public key of receiver. Sender can use public key of receiver. I'll show you how who is the originator for that particular key generation and how that particular key is transmitted to receiver, right? The sender. Now this is decryption algorithm. This is decryption algorithm. This decryption algorithm is used by the uh, receiver decryption algorithm. And which key is used, I will tell you now. Because different scenarios are there. So based on that scenario, based on sender used key, receiver can use the related key, right? So this is the destination. We can finally receive encrypted data. This is destination block, right? If sender wants to send or convey a X, any message, X is called as plain text to the receiver. In the first scenario, what I'm going to tell you is if sender uses receiver's public key, then he is relying on receiver. So key pair originator is receiver now. Key pair originator is receiver because sender wants to use receiver's public. Okay, na? Key originator is receiver. He generates two keys, right? Every user responsibility is to generate two keys, right? So one key is used for encryption, another key must be used for decryption, right? So here, sender is using public key of receiver. Let the sender and receiver names are suppose A. A is sender, and this is the receiver part. Suppose the receiver is B, right? E is sender. Now sender name is A, and the receiver name is B, right? B is the receiver. Now, receiver generated keys are used by the sender now. Now, sender wants to use receiver's public key. Generally, public key representation is PU and receiver name is B. So, PUB, right? So, sender is using PUB. PUB means sender's receiver's public key. Then, what is the related key now? Related key is private key, right? Related key is the corresponding private key. Generally, private key in shorter form represented as PR. So PRB. If PUB is used by the sender, then at the receiver side, receiver must use the related key in that particular pair, related key. So PUB and PRB are related to each other because PUB and PRB are calculated with relationship, mathematical relationship, right? So this is the first scenario. Here sender is using public key of receiver. Public key is known to any person. So any person can raise the message, but that particular message is successfully received, decrypted by the receiver. So in this particular scenario, only confidentiality is provided because at the receiver side, receiver is using private key, but at the sender side, so there is no private key here. Sender is simply using public key of receiver. That along with sender, all other remaining users are also knowing public key of receiver. So here every user is maintaining all the remaining users public keys. Whenever any user wants to communicate with any other user, he can use his own private key or public key of any recipient, right? Okay, na? So here sender wants to communicate with receiver B, so that's why sender can use either his own private key or public key of receiver. In first scenario, what I shown here, sender is using public key of receiver. If sender uses public key of receiver, then receiver must use his own private key because these two are related. If you use one key for encryption, then another key must be used for decryption, right? Then only the receiver can successfully decrypt the message. So X is the message he wants to convey. Then the Y is the finalized message after encryption. Then again, by using decryption, you can restore X, right? I'll write the formulas now. Y is ciphertext, right? Y is ciphertext. The ciphertext is generated by, suppose if you take the name, if you name encryption algorithm as E, then E is receiving two informations here. One is X, another one is public key of receiver. So symbolically, we can write encryption algorithm like this. Suppose like this, because encryption algorithm is a function which takes two arguments. One is X, another one is public key of receiver, and this encryption algorithm maps X onto Y, means it produces Y. But at the receiving end, receiver is using decryption, right? That decryption is used for restoring original message X. Original message X. So that decryption algorithm is D. That decryption algorithm is D. Then he decrypts original message or he decrypts ciphertext and he restores the original message by using his own private key, right? His own private key. So symbolically, we can write encryption and decryption like this. So this is the one scenario. In this particular scenario, which produces confidentiality only. Suppose if we talk about cryptanalyst, generally cryptanalyst is also staying in communication channel, right? Cryptanalyst. Suppose You want only current message, then he is concentrating on X cap, right? X cap. Suppose you want to live longer time on this particular communication channel, then he is trying to extract private key of receiver, right? If we know private key of receiver, then we can also extract each and every information which is shared between sender and receiver, right? Or if you want to stay very smaller time, shorter time, that too you want to extract current message only, then he is concentrating on plain text. You want to live longer time on communication channel and you want to extract each and every message which is shared between sender and receiver, then he is trying to extract private key of receiver, right? So this is this one scenario. In this scenario, sender is using public key of receiver and then receiver must use his own private key. So in this case, no authentication here because he is using public key. Anyone can also use the public key of receiver, right? They can also send the message, but only authorized receiver can decrypt the message because these two are related each other. These two keys are related each other. Here, receiver is using private key. That's why we say that confidentiality only provided in this particular scenario. So this is one particular scenario, right? I'll tell you next scenario, that is if sender uses his own private key, what happens? I'll show you. If sender uses his own private key, then the scenario provides authentication. Then receiver must use public key of sender. Then public key is known to each and every person, right? Public key is known to each and every person. In the second configuration, the here key originator is sender because sender wants to use his own private key, right? Sender wants to use his own private key. Then I draw here originator and how keys are shared because now pair originator. Key pair originator in the second scenario is sender because sender wants to use his own private key, right? Sender wants to use his own private key for encryption. Anyway, private key representation is PR. Here we are assuming that sender is E, right? If sender uses his own private key for encryption, then what about receiver? Receiver must use the related key. Related key for private key is public key. So public key of sender must be used by the receiver, right? Anyway, this private key is known to all the persons, including receiver. So there is no confidentiality. Anyone can decrypt. Even sender uses his own private key for encrypting. Only authentication is provided because authorized user can use this. Only sender can use his own private key. No other user can use PRA, right? Because PRA is private key of user A. This particular key can be used by only sender. So that's why we say that he is authorized person. Then authentication is provided. In this case, authentication is provided, right? Why no confidentiality is there? Because public key, if sender uses his own private key, then receiver must use his public key, right? Sender's public key. We know that every user public key is known to every other user in the organization, right? Every other user in the organization. That's why no confidentiality. Everyone can see. No confidentiality. Every other user can see the message. Every other user can decrypt the message, right? But here, crypt analyst is concentrating on private key of sender because here the private key is related to sender. So that's why here instead of PRB, the crypt analyst concentrating on PRA because if opponent knows PRA, he can also know in this particular moment he can also know what is the plain text that is shared between sender and receiver, right? So he's in this particular scenario, he is crypt analyst means opponent or third attacker concentrating on private key of sender or plain text, right? Plain text. If he wants current message only, he is trying to extract plain text by using brute force method or any other method. If you want to live longer time on this particular channel, he is wishing to know the private key, then he can also try to extract private key. But actually, the message is decrypted by public key of sender. It is very easy because public is known to all the participants in the organization, right? So this configuration is providing only confidentiality. previous architecture is providing only, sorry, this architecture is providing only authentication because sender is using his own private key, receiver must use public key of sender. That is known to all the persons. That's why no confidentiality is given this architecture. But as an organization person, you must provide both confidentiality and authentication. Then you need to combine these two methods. Then only we can provide both confidentiality and authentication. I'll show you how to combine this particular method. Okay, I need to arrange all this because uh, two encryptions and two decryptions must be provided, right? Because sender must use private key, receiver must use private key, right? If sender uses private key, receiver must encrypt using sender's private key. So sender cannot use private key of receiver. So that's why sender must use public key of receiver for another encryption. Then only sender can use his own private key. So double encryption and double decryption is required, right? So double encryption and double decryption is required in this scenario. Then only we get both authentication and confidentiality. So that's why use two encryption blocks here, two encryption blocks here, and two decryption blocks at the receiver side. This is sender portion, right? And receiver side, receiver must conduct uh, two decryptions because sender is using two encryptions. I'll show you how encryption and decryption taking place, right? So these are algorithm blocks. That's why I'm separating algorithm blocks from normal blocks which are representing sender and receiver, right? These two are algorithms. Here, these two are algorithms. Just for there is no other significance. Just for differentiating the algorithm and users, right? So these two are algorithms. This is source and this is destination, right? First block is source, last block is destination, and middle blocks are encryption blocks and decryption blocks, right? This destination. So uh, uh, here we are considering both the parties are key originators, right? Key pair originators, because a pair of keys or two pair of keys are involved in this key pair originator, right? Here key pair originator is sender as well as receiver. And receiver is also going to generate key pair originator, right? Key pair originator. So sender is also required here. Receiver's keys are also required here. Because for providing confidentiality and authentication, both sender and receiver must use private keys. But at a time, using private keys is not possible. If one side private key is used, another side public key must be used for that particular decryption. And one side the sender uses his own private key, receiver must use sender's public key, but he cannot use his own private key for private key. So that's why sender must also use receiver's public key. Then only receiver can use his own private key. That's why two encryptions and two decryptions are required, right? So initially we are assuming that first encryption is conducted by using sender's private key. PRA. This is the first encryption conducted by using sender's private key. Then the next encryption is conducted by using receiver's public key, right? So next encryption is conducted by using this is encryption algorithm. Sender side, whatever the algorithms that are involved, we call them as encryption algorithms, right? Suppose if you take X as input, initial message, then after completion of first encryption, this X is converted into another message. Just we are calling that message as Y, and by using second encryption, this Y is converted into another message, then we are calling it as Z, right? So this is P. So sender first he uses his own private key for encrypting the data. Then for the next encryption, he is using public key. So this public key uses allowing the receiver to use his own private key, right? So generally receiver is following reverse operations. So what is the last operation now? Last operation is the second encryption, but that second encryption used public key of receiver. Then we must conduct all the operations in reverse because Z is inputted to first decryption algorithm, right? Z is inputted, but Z is extracted from Y. So that's why from Z we must restore Y. So for restoring purpose, generally for extracting Z from Y, the sender used public key of receiver. Then he must use his own private key here. He must use his own private key because opposite he has to process. So from Z he has to restore Y, right? From Z he has to restore Y. So Z is extracted from Y or Z is generated from Y by using public key of receiver. So from Z, he must restore Y by using his own private key, right? So these two are related. So that's why these two are used in sequence. Okay, now in reverse, right? Last operation related reverse is this, and first operation related reverse is this, right? So after restoring y, generally y is extracted from z, x, right? So you must generate y from x. But for generating y, he used private key, sender used private key, then receiver must use, in reverse, receiver must use public key of sender. Public key of sender. Then only he can restore x from y. Then only he can restore x from y. So in this way, sender uses his own private key and the receiver's public key, and the reverse, receiver uses his own private key and the sender's public key in this sequence. But here sender can also change the roles of these two keys. Initially, he can use public key of receiver. Later, he can use his own private key. If he uses his own private key as a latest operation, then receiver must use public key of sender. Whatever the last encryption used key, we must use the related key for first decryption, right? So these two are related. These two are related. This must be conducted reverse than this, and these two are related. First and last are related. These two must be conducted in reverse, right? These two must be conducted in reverse because y generates z, then you must generate y from z, right? And y is generated from x, so that's why you must generate x from y. Reverse, right? Yeah, y is generated from x. Here you must generate x from y. Z is generated from Y. In this particular block, he must generate Y from Z. Reverse, he has to conduct. So whatever the keys that are used, he must use the related key in reverse operation, right? The latest key is public key of receiver. In the first decryption, he must use his own private key. Then only he can generate Y from Z. Reverse, right? Z is generated from Y using public key of receiver. Then he must use his own private key to generate Y from Z, right? So in this, once after restoring y from z, we must restore original message x, right? But y is generated from x with the help of private key of sender. So that's why he must use public key of sender for generating x from y, right? So here both the parties used private keys. Sender used private key, receiver has also used private key. So if sender uses private key, then we say that authentication is provided. Authentication is provided, right? If receiver uses his own private key, then we say that confidentiality is provided. Confidentiality is provided, right? So we say that both confidentiality is authentication is provided if sender and receiver uses double operations. If sender encrypts twice the given message, he must decrypt twice, right? So double encryption and double decryptions are involved. Then we say that both confidentiality and authentication provided. But there is no thumb rule that sender uses his own private key first. He can also use public key of receiver first, right? He can also use public key of receiver here and here his own private key. If he uses his own private key here, then the sender's public key must be used immediately. After that, his own private key. Reverse, right? If he reverse the keys, then the reverse way the receiver must use. So symbolically, we can represent x, y, z, or suppose y, sender side y. How can we represent y from sender side? Suppose sender side y is represented as, generally y is extracted from encryption algorithm with the help of x, but here sender use his own private key, right? Sender use his own private key. And now Z is generated from sender. Again, one more encryption is applied on y, but here sender used public key of PUD, public key of receiver. So these two are the messages generated from sender side. So finally, final message is Z, right? But at the receiver side, initially Y is generated because the latest operation is last message is Z, last message is Z. This Z is extracted from Y, but in reverse, he must generate Y from Z. So Y is generated by receiver? He must use decryption algorithm, and input is Z, which key is because last operation used to sender uses for the last operation is public key of receiver. Then he must use his own private key, his own private key. Once this particular operation is active or performed, then we can restore Y. But finally, his target is to restore X. Restore X again, you must conduct one more decryption, but input is Y to last decryption operation. You must use sender's private, sender's public, right? Sender's public. Then we can also write this entire thing by replacing Y. Because what is Y? D of PRB of Z. You can replace Y with D of PRB of Z. So like this, these are the messages finalized at receiver side. But finally, you can restore X by using the last decryption operation. So this is public key cryptography. Here, in this particular last scenario, both authentication and confidentiality are provided because sender and receiver, both the parties are using private keys. So sender uses his own private key, receiver is also using his own private key, but only these two keys usage is not possible. If sender uses his own private key, receiver must use public key of sender for decryption. If a receiver is using his own private key at his side, then sender must also use his own receiver's public key at sender side. So that's why two encryptions are required at sender side. Relatively, two decryptions must be conducted by the receiver. So very strengthened. So this particular scenario is providing authentication and confidentiality. And these are the messages. Symbolically, we can represent them. And these two are the messages we can represent symbolically like this, right? So these are these are the different configurations. Previous two and this one. Previous two are providing either authentication or confidentiality, but this one is providing both authentication and confidentiality, right? And finally, I'll tell you what are the requirements of this particular public key cryptography, and I'll start, right? So what are the requirements of public key cryptography? So generally requirements are it is very easy, right? It is very easy by the receiver and sender to generate their own public key and private key keys, right? It is very easy, feasible. It is computationally feasible to generate public key and private key by both the parties, right? It is very easy. So that is the first requirement. First requirement is, what is the first requirement? It is very easy or computationally feasible. We call it as computationally feasible to generate data keys. Computationally feasible to generate computationally feasible to generate data keys. Okay, any participant can generate data keys, right? This is computationally easy. Second one is it is computationally feasible. It is computationally feasible to use public key. Generally, public key is represented as PU, public key of destination, right? It is public. It is computationally easy to use public key of destination by the sender, by the source or sender, right? By the source or sender. If sender uses public key of destination, it is also computationally feasible to use destination or receiver's private key for decryption. Receiver uses his own private key, right? So all these are feasible operations, right? What is the first feasible operation? Every user can easily generate pair of keys. Second feasibility is if a receiver sender wants to communicate with receiver, he can very easily use public key of receiver or destination because that is available. If sender uses public key of destination or receiver, then it is very computationally feasible to use receiver's private key for the decryption at the receiver side, right? Then what are the infeasible operations? These are feasible. And the requirements are it is very computationally impossible. Computationally impossible or infeasible. Impossible to generate private key, to generate private key PR, even public key is known. Even PU is known. If opponent knows PU, if opponent knows PU, but it is computationally impossible. Just by knowing public key, cannot generate private key. That is another requirement, right? And the next one is it is computationally impossible or infeasible to generate private key by knowing public key and ciphertext. It is also not possible. Even opponent or criminal knows ciphertext and the public key, ciphertext and public key. It is computationally impossible or infeasible to generate private key, right? The first fourth step is even public key is known to opponent. It is not possible to generate private key. Even opponent knows public key and ciphertext. It is not possible to generate private key, right? And the last one is sender can use public key of receiver and private key of his own as a sequence for providing or producing public key. Suppose the receiver is B, sender is A. We can use first receiver's public key for encrypting, and he is use his own private key for encrypting, or he can use his own private key first, or he can use his own private key first, followed by public key of receiver. Any sequence, you can use any sequence, right? You can use this sequence for encrypting or this sequence for decrypting. So based on the sequence, receiver uses the relative sequence. Okay, na? If this sequence is used first for first encryption and second encryption, then he must use for first decryption he uses his own private key. For the second decryption he uses public key of sender. But in this scenario, last operation is used by his own private key. Then at the receiver side, first decryption is used public key of sender, and second decryption is using private key of receiver, right? So whatever the order, you can take any order, right? Either this order sender uses for double encryption, or this order sender uses double encryption for providing both authentication and confidentiality. Okay, na? So this is about public key cryptography, essential steps, and different scenarios and requirements, right? Okay. So this is about the topic of public key cryptography. Uh, that's all from my end. Okay. Thank you for watching my video. Thank you so much.